Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here today to introduce a fantastic panel that's going to be discussing net zero and various issues around that topic. Net zero is becoming a pervasive ideology that is penetrating a lot of sectors of our society. So we definitely think it's time as a conference to have a constructive discussion about it. After all, Canada, like many of the Western countries, is a science-based country and has a science-based economy. But part of being science-based is also to make sure that science can be kept in check, can be questioned in the spirit of advancement. So without further ado, I will let you with Gina Pappano and her distinguished guests.
Good afternoon. My name is Gina Pappano, and I'm Executive Director of Invest Now, a not-for-profit corporation that challenges the divestment movement in Canada. We advocate for investment in the Canadian resources sectors, especially the oil and gas sector, for the good of the economy, the environment, shareholders, and all Canadians. Prior to Invest Now, I was Head of Market Intelligence at the Toronto Stock Exchange and TSX Venture Exchange. It is my pleasure now to introduce our panel members and ask them to give some brief remarks. Dr. Benny Peiser is the director of the London-based Global Warming Policy Foundation, one of the world's leading climate and energy policy think tanks. Dr. Peiser has written extensively on domestic and international climate policy. And after all the astronomy talk on this side of the pond about the eclipse on Monday, a fun fact is that a 10-kilometer wide asteroid, minor planet 7107 Peiser, was named in Dr. Peiser's honor by the International Astronomical Union. Benny, over to you.
Thank you, Gina. Well, I've been asked to talk about the situation in Europe, and I can tell you that net zero is falling apart as we speak. The main reason why net zero isn't working is for two reasons. The main reason is that people are beginning to feel the pinch and feel the pain. They've been asked to rip out their gas boilers and replace them with heat pumps, which are 2 or 3 times as expensive and not heating as well, and they've been asked to give up their cars and buy electric vehicles. These are two of the key issues that have led to, and never mind the farmers, but these are the two key issues that have led to a rebellion in Europe to such an extent that the EU is beginning to delay, water down, roll back a lot of these policies. There will be European elections in June, and the expectation is that the protest vote will be quite significant. Interestingly, you may have heard that the European Court of Human Rights has ruled that governments have to tackle climate change, regardless how much it costs. Totally irrelevant. On the same day, most people haven't noticed, but on the same day, the draft agenda for the next 5 years of the EU's next 5 years was leaked, in which it says that the EU is relegating climate and focusing increasingly on defense. So the EU is doing exactly the opposite of what the European Court of Human Rights is demanding, and the reason is simple. There has been a public revolt over these policies that are extremely unpopular, extremely expensive, and you may have seen, I think there was a story in the National Post this morning saying that the European car industry is facing a bloodbath. No one wants to buy EVs, and the European ports have become big car parks because hundreds of thousands of Chinese EVs are parked in European ports waiting to be sold. These Chinese cars are cheaper and many are also better, but the Europeans who claim that they are so concerned about climate change are absolutely scared that people will buy cheap Chinese EVs rather than European cars, which would devastate the European car market or car industry, just as the Chinese solar panel completely devastated the European solar panel industry. So that's the situation. Watch this space. As I said, it's falling apart. Everyone is U-turning. Everyone is watering down. There is hardly any government in Europe that is sticking to its pledges, including the UK government, regardless of what Boris was saying. It's not cheap, it's not popular, it's expensive and unpopular, and that is the main reason why it's going down.
Thank you, Benny. Our next panel member, Francis Menton, is the president of the American Friends of the GWPF. He was a partner at the American and international law firm Wilkie, Farr & Gallagher in New York for more than 30 years. He blogs at manhattancontrarian.com, where he writes extensively about energy and climate issues, often addressing the cost and practicality of the proposed net zero energy transition. Francis?
Thank you, Gina. So my piece of this is the U.S. reckoning. I'm from the American Friends of the GWPF, and I live in New York, and New York fancies itself the leader of the U.S. in the rush to net zero. Now, the good news for the U.S. is that the U.S. is well behind Europe on this. So the reckoning has not really come in the U.S. yet. Other good news for the U.S. is the red states are fighting back, as I'm sure most of you know. Also, the federal government has much less power than you might think. The U.S. federal government under Biden and previously under Obama would dearly, dearly love to be able to ban fracking and restrict fossil fuel production and use. They do not have the power. The frackers go right ahead no matter what restrictions and regulations are put on them, and the production of oil and gas in the U.S. has been hitting new records. So that's the federal level. At the state level, the blue states are forging ahead, led by California and New York. And when we talk about a U.S. reckoning, there will be a reckoning. And there will be a reckoning because net zero is both a physical and an economic impossibility. What we don't know is whether the reckoning will first manifest itself as a physical problem or an economic problem, or both. Let me just briefly address California and New York. California, which is led by radical political crazies and has enacted every possible regulation, but it has some secrets on why it will probably not be the first with the reckoning. The biggest one is that it has the ability to import huge amounts of power from its neighboring states that have natural gas and in the north, hydropower, and also nuclear. And so over the course of a year, it imports as much as 30% or more of its power, often at premium prices, so it drives the prices up. Now California has a new scheme that they're going to have income-based electricity bills. So, but this is a device to hide the economic impact from anybody who might notice for as long as possible. So this is why I think that the reckoning is not going to come first in California, which leaves my loving home state of New York, led by equally insane people. We got a later start than others. But we have a Climate Act of 2019, it's only a few years ago, that requires a number of steps to be achieved. The first major one is 70% of electricity from renewables by 2030. And the current percentage is around 25. And by the way, of the 25, the large majority of that comes from Niagara Falls. So that's really cheating too, but there isn't another Niagara Falls. So they've got to get from 25 to 70 in 6 years. And They have specifically said we're closing all the natural gas plants, not necessarily within the 6 years, but certainly within 10. What the hell are they going to do? And the answer is the DEFR, the dispatchable emissions-free resource. When anybody calculates how much of this you need, it essentially is going to be as much as all the natural gas plants we have. The dispatchable emissions-free resource does not exist. And they are announcing that this is going to be 70% by 2030 and 100% by 2035. It's not going to happen. Now, does this come to an end? And we have very limited ability to import. We have some, but not nearly as much as California. So, is this going to come to an end physically or economically? Well, it's not going to come to an end in time to teach Canada a lesson for the next election, unfortunately. Probably in time to educate Canada. By 2030, the crunch will have come in some way, shape, or form. So I'll leave it there until I get more questions.
Good. Thank you very much for your remarks, gentlemen. We have a pretty good cross-section here of industrialized nations represented among us, the UK, the US, and Canada. Net zero by 2050 is currently the #1 ideological, political, and financial goal in Canada. What I'm finding through the work that I'm doing is that while there are many governments and corporations pledging net zero by 2050, it is hard to define what the pledge means and how it will affect the economy and prosperity of a country. Could you define net zero by 2050 and speak to how it will affect industry, economy, security, and citizenry? Ben?
Yeah, well, basically it means a complete decarbonization of the economy, which means no more conventional internal combustion engines, no more conventional cars, no more conventional heating. Industry will have to completely decarbonize, like steel, aluminium, and so on. These are radical and utopian attempts, and incidentally, these targets only apply to most OECD countries. The rest of the world obviously don't have these targets, and if they have, they are not binding. And even those, like in India, they have a 2070 target. They're saying, well, if you want us to do this, we need $1 trillion per year from the developed world. And that's just India, never mind the rest of the developing world. So net zero is an agenda that is mainly driven by OECD countries. Somehow, some of the leaders do understand that there is a problem in that while the developed world is trying to decarbonize, the developing world is trying to grow and to emit as much as they can as they go along, because that's how they are powering their, industries. That's the kind of comedy of the net zero agenda, that it's actually, they think that if we do it in Canada or in Europe or in the US, somehow CO2 emissions would be reduced. The reality is that we are just basically exporting CO2 emissions to countries that are still manufacturing, and we are just importing the stuff from China and saying, oh, look how green we are. But the CO2 emissions are the same whether you produce stuff in Canada or Britain or in China. Only in China is much more intensive. So net zero is a political agenda that is beginning to facing a severe political and economic crisis. And watch Europe, because Europe is ground zero for net zero. And this is the spot where you will see it will fall apart first. Who knows what happens in Canada, but you are about 5 years behind Europe. If you want to continue on the European path, then you will have to pay the same price, I guess.
If I might throw in a few other remarks, Benny didn't even mention airplanes. That's definitely included in net zero. Nobody has any idea how they're going to decarbonize airplanes. Yeah. Then we have trucking. Nobody has any idea how to do that either, but California thinks the way to do it is you order that it be done and the little people will figure it out. So they have ordered that it be done in California, and they have a series of deadlines for how much trucking has to be battery-driven, electrified, which have already started to kick in, and they're going to kick in substantially over just the next couple of years, and I think almost entirely by 2030. So that is clearly not going to happen. So there is an example of a physical barrier being reached, but that's clearly included in net zero. Trucking has to be decarbonized. Agriculture has to be decarbonized. Nobody has any idea how to do that. Ocean shipping has to be decarbonized. Nobody has any idea how to do that, and so forth.
Right. So the definition of net zero is impossible, or something that is impossible.
And the current generation of politicians are pretending to make progress on it, and we're just going to leave the little pieces for the next generation. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. So as we mentioned, we're witnessing a net zero rebellion in Europe right now. Can you maybe expand a little bit about it? How did it come about? How far ahead do you think Europe is? I know you said about 5 years. When do you think North America's time of reckoning will come?
Well, the rebellion really happened over the last 12, 18 months to such an extent that the EU actually caved in. And it was mainly the farmers who you may have seen in the news farmers protest, a bit like the truckers here, but they were actually successful in that the EU eventually caved and said, okay, we'll not implement these emissions policies for farming. We will delay until after the election, because that's their main concern. But the protest is to such a level that elections have been lost over this. In Holland, one of the skeptical politicians actually won the election outright. In other countries like Sweden, they have abandoned their renewable energy target and have said, we're not going for renewables, we're going for nuclear energy. So there is a growing interest in alternative energy policies. And also they're running out of money for handouts for renewables. Renewables are, a bottomless pit, and also what politicians are beginning to realize is that renewables are so unreliable that you actually have to build backup for those periods when there is no wind. So left, right, and center, they are building new gas-fired power plants, but they have to basically subsidize them because no one is building a gas-fired power plant that is only used 25% of the year as a backup. So the rebellion is growing. There is also concern that these populist parties that are skeptical or opposed to net zero will win the European election, or at least will be one of the victors of the election. And there is a good chance that the next European election will be much, much more skeptical about these green issues and much more focused on economic recovery, because Europe, as you know, is in economic crisis, and part of the reason is extremely high energy prices.
In terms of timing in the U.S. and when this wall may be hit, first of all, as I mentioned, the red state's pushing back and the federal government only having so much it can do. I don't think there's any wall going to be hit in those places in the next 5 years. And similarly, California, for reasons that I've discussed, because it can import, because the prices are going up, but it's very rich, it subsidizes the lower-income people. There's various reasons, and plus the government is completely in control of left-wingers who are unlikely to just back off.
Yep.
And they're not going to lose an election in California. So they're going to be able to continue that for the next 5 years. Now, in New York, there's every reason to think that within the next 5 years, even though we have a similar thing with the politicians, they're not going to lose an election. It's totally in control of the far left. But there's every reason to think that within the next 5 years, a physical limit of some sort is going to be hit in their plant. Excuse me.
At this juncture, I'd like to open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, I have some more questions to ask. But if anyone would like to ask any questions of the panel. Yes, sir?
So California is running a $65 billion deficit. How do they continue subsidizing this?
I haven't tried to look into the details of California's. I'm sorry. His question was, California is reporting that it has a $65 billion deficit. How are they going to subsidize it? There's many different kinds of subsidies. The kind I was talking about was an electric ratepayer subsidy, so it's not part of the state budget. So what they're planning to do with the electric ratepayers is say, you've got to submit your income tax return to determine your electricity rate, and the rates are going to go up, but only for the upper income taxpayers, and they will cross-subsidize the lower income taxpayers. It doesn't go through the state budget. Now, there's all kinds of other subsidies for green energy in the California budget. I can't say I'm hugely well informed about it, but I would suspect that they may be one of the last things to get cut. They are going to have to do some serious budget balancing there.
Yes, sir?
What happened in New York? Because you said that New York is sort of belatedly got on this train, whereas California was all in for a long time.
Yes, so the question there is, what happened in New York that made it go from belatedly on this train and now suddenly surging forth? And there actually is a very good story on that. So what occurred in New York is forever, the New York State legislature had been divided between Democratic control of the Assembly and Republican control of the state Senate. And the Republican control of the state Senate was a brake upon all the crazy ideas of the Assembly. And it got to the point in about 2017 or so, where the Assembly has 150 members. It was like 104 Democrats and 40-something Republicans, and the state Senate was 65 members, 33 to 32. And then the Democrats won a couple of other seats, and the Republicans convinced a couple of Democrats to caucus with them so that the Democrats couldn't elect a speaker, and they kept stalling things until the 2018 election, and the Democrats had a huge sweep. And then after the redistricting, they had a huger sweep, and now they have veto-proof majorities in both houses of the state legislature. So that, and 2019, after the first sweep, is when they adopted this Climate Act with all these goals. So it wasn't adopted until then.
Yes?
Questions for Dr. Pizer. I wonder if you could comment on the extent to which security issues have played a role in the reduction in the priority placed upon net zero initiatives.
Yes, so the question was the level of security concern in Europe driving down the climate agenda. That's quite manifest now. Obviously, the Europeans are beginning to realize that they have to rearm, that they actually have to have an army. The European armies are, they are more into dancing than fighting. And this is what I was saying, this agenda that was leaked on the day that the European Court of Human Rights announced their ruling. The agenda sets out clearly that the climate issue, net zero, will be relegated to a lower priority, and most of the spending in the EU over the next 5 years will be defense spending. And that clearly signals a significant political shift. Even now, within the EU, this might actually accelerate after the European elections. The Europeans are beginning to fear net zero more than climate change, because what they are beginning to realize is that all the green technologies that they are demanding for net zero is coming from China. And there is not a single solar panel manufacturer in Europe that can compete with the Chinese solar panels, and there is no single automaker, car maker, that can compete with Chinese EVs. So the only way they can deal with it is putting barriers up, kind of protection and border taxes. But of course that will backfire, as we all know, making everything more expensive, and obviously the Chinese will retaliate. So at the end of the day, it becomes clear that the Europeans have totally miscalculated, because their original idea was that the green agenda Europe would become the green superpower. Europe would produce all the green technology and then sell it to the rest of the world. And they somehow didn't realize that the Chinese can do this for half the price. And so now they are more concerned about the Chinese products, green technology, than they are about climate change. And that's why they are beginning to roll back.
So, to each of you panelists, is nuclear power an option?
Well, there is
Sorry, the question was, is nuclear power an option?
Yeah, of course it's an option, and there is now growing interest in Europe in particular. It's not a renaissance, yes, because nuclear power is extremely expensive, and there's not enough competition, and we don't know yet with the small modular reactors how they will pan out and what they will cost. But there's clearly a realization that the future of energy will be nuclear. The question is, how do we get there? And there are people who are beginning to realize that the renewables are actually a hurdle to that path. And the most, pragmatic policy would be a gas to nuclear pathway. So there is a growing interest in nuclear, but it's still extremely expensive and has to be heavily subsidized.
Sorry.
If I might address the U.S.
We're running a little bit at a time.
I'll see if I can do it in 30 seconds. First of all, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is anti-nuclear. Second of all, in New York State, there is a fully built nuclear plant that was finished and actually started operational testing. It never went live 30 years ago. Shut down, sitting there, nothing wrong with it. And what I will say to you, when that plant opens, I'll believe in nuclear.
Did you have a question? Sorry.
What does the road to rebellion look like? What are the mileposts?
Well, the rebellion is first of all...
The question was, what does the road to rebellion look like? What are the mileposts?
The rebellion against net zero looks very simple. Any government that adopts net zero policy that are painful will be voted out. And that's what's currently happening in Europe. Almost every government that is sticking to net zero will be voted out. I have no doubt about it. It's begun in a number of countries, and it will continue.
A lesson for Canada.
And that, exactly. So whenever you have a new government, you better tell them not to repeat the mistakes of conservative governments in Europe, because they are all finished. I mean, you may know what happened to the conservatives in Britain. They are basically, as a party, for the time being, they're finished. They have no future until and unless they change their policies on net zero and a number of other issues as well.
We're out of time. So thank you both for joining the panel today. Just one thing I want to say is, in net zero by 2050, it's currently the #1 ideological, political, and financial goal in Canada. Governments, regulatory agencies, they're all creating and implementing policies to phase out oil and gas, and our financial institutions are following suit. So let's hope that the reckoning comes here sooner than we think, and we'll get some change going. Thank you.